What's up, everybody? It's Goddess Z, and I'm back with another episode on Holistic and Spiritual AF. Welcome back, fam. I appreciate each and every last one of you for tuning in, making this podcast great. And if this is your first time hopping on this podcast, then you landed in the right spot. If you're into topics such as how to connect with your ancestors, how to activate your divine feminine codes, metaphysics, we talk about all sorts of things, esoterics, and applicable tools that you can actually use to start to implement these in your life. Okay. This podcast airs every Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On the first and the third Friday, I have a guest hopping on the podcast, sharing their wisdom, their expertise. On the second and the fourth, it's me coming in with my downloads and transmissions throughout the month. So be sure to go ahead and hit that follow, that subscribe, depending on whatever platform you're listening on. I'm all over social media at Holistic and Spiritual AF. That's and spelled out. And of course, you can check out my website for all the latest classes, what's happening, all that good stuff at holisticsandspiritualaf.com. Okay. So let's get into today's episode because you do not want to miss this. Okay. Today, my guest is Mawiyah Kai EL-Jamah Bomani, and she is the author of Hoodoo Saints and Root Warriors, as well as Conjuring the Calabash, Empowering Women with Hoodoo Spells and Magic. And so, of course, I'm going to have all her information down in the description, okay? But I want to talk a little bit about her because this is powerful, okay? In this powerful conversation, we're going to be joined by Mawiyah, excuse me. She's a New Orleans-born writer, a priestess of OYA, Egun Medium, and eighth generation spiritual practitioner whose work lives in the crossroads of hoodoo, liberation, and ancestral resistance. We are going to be talking mostly about her newest book, Hoodoo Saints and Root Warriors, Stories and Magic for Liberation. This just dropped in 2025. It's a spiritual war manual for navigating oppression, injustice, and survival through ancestral alignment and hoodoo cosmology. Mawiyah breaks down how working with the hoodoo saints, root work, and ancestral forces becomes not just spiritual practice, but political embodied liberation. We also reflect on her contribution in the film Sinners, the urgency of spiritual tools in trying times, and how storytelling itself becomes the spell work. We're also going to touch a little bit on her earlier work of Conjuring the Calabash, Empowering Women with Hoodoo, Spells, and Magic. That dropped in 2023. And that's a reclamation of womb wisdom, power, and protection for women across identities, including trans and queer women. So this episode is for those who know liberation is not theoretical, it's ritual, it's remembrance, and it's refusal. Okay, so definitely you want to hear this entire podcast all the way to the end. And I just wanted to show you guys the book here. This is the Hoodoo Saints and Root Warriors book, and get your copy. I'll be sure to have that information down in the description. And without further ado, y'all, let's get into today's episode. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Mawiyah. I'm super honored to have you here. You're doing some amazing things out there. First and foremost, you are the author of Hoodoo Saints and Warriors. Hoodoo Saints and Root Warriors.
Mhm.
And this book just came out recently. Okay. So you're the author of that. You're the author of another book as well. You're also diving deep into closed practices, spiritual practices. You talk a lot about women as spiritual leaders. So yeah, I'm like really excited to dive into this conversation with you.
Mhm.
So first things first, I want to kind of jump and talk into the book because I got my copy maybe a month ago, like right
Oh,
after it
okay.
came out.
Mhm.
Yeah. So just kind of tell me how you got inspired to do this. Like,
Right.
what pushed you to do this?
Well, the first book, Conjuring the Calabash, was more or less when I started working on that around the time of the pandemic. And so with that book, it was more about trying to get people interested again in our indigenous practices. So often we, in Black and Brown communities, we demonize our own work, right? And a lot of it is because we live in the West, and Christianity is the law of the land. And so anything that goes, against you, just praying for forgiveness and just working it out, and in the end, it'll all work itself out, is looked at as being wrong. And so I wrote the first book to try to get us back into this deeper understanding that it's part of who we are, right? And so if we want to really heal ourselves and heal our communities, then we need to reach back into our indigenous practices. And so once that book dropped, I thought about how we can further that. in terms of liberation, especially under the current administration where we are right now, and utilizing, our people that we look at as being sheroes and heroes, canonizing them as saints.
Mhm.
Right. And so a lot of the individuals, it was divined upon to find out who would fit this particular book. And I just went from there to think about clients, people that I work with, problems, issues that they have in their life, and how they fit into the overall theme of each chapter. And so I knew that I wanted to have something that people could go to, and they could, just sort of feel like they could use it to fight as another tool in their arsenal. Everyday things that are happening for us, whether we are, gay, lesbian, straight, just, male, female, children, elders, how we, deal with the world outside, how everything is changing, this climate, how we can fight against that. So that's what's the impetus for this book.
I love that. And I love how you said that the saints were divined upon, so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
always makes things different.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so do you think that and I love the fact that you said, "Hey, we need to start reconnecting with our roots and our indigenous
Hmm.
practices." I'm all
Hmm.
about that. So I'm grateful that you went ahead and wrote something on that. So do you think that this was something that like maybe came from your ancestors, like from a dream, or was this
Yeah.
just something
Yeah.
inside of you that just knew?
Definitely the ancestors. My grandfather, when I sit with my ancestral altar space, he is one who always steps forward. So during my writing journey, it's always this conversation with my grandfather. And I remember thinking before I wrote the first book that I really wanted to work on some children's stories, right? And I remember him coming to me constantly saying, "Not yet, not yet. We have to do this thing." And so it was just a process of putting it together. Like I say, we were home during we were shut in during the pandemic, and just really figuring out how to deal with clients, how to help them, how to help my family. And so, yeah, it happened that way, in which he just kept coming and I just kept writing, and so it grew from that. And then from, like I said, from the first book, seeing how much more was needed in terms of, I grew up, in New Orleans, and I went to Catholic school. And oftentimes when we hear about the saints, we always hear about white people. When we see the stained glass, it's always these white images. And I had a teacher there, Bishop Perry, who talked about, Marie Laveau being a saint, right? This person who did all of these things, but we only just think about voodoo, right? And in the Hollywood sense, right? This scary idea of all of these things, zombies and stuff like that. But we had this woman who worked in prison ministry. I mean, preparing gumbo for these people, taking care of their families, making sure that enslaved people who were trying to get away were able to, reach freedom, and taking care of Native American communities. All of these things she did, but we don't always hear about. And so when he relegated her to being a saint, that always stuck with me, And so when I thought about the individuals that we might pour libation for, during Kwanzaa or a specific time, why can't we, call on them for their energy, their strength, when we need it, like during these times? Why just put them, on the shelf, so to speak, for an event or an activity we were doing? And so that was the reason for creating Root Warriors. We need to have this warrior energy with us, in our day to day. So yeah, and so my grandfather, he kept saying that, you have to use this energy just like you use your ancestral altar space, right? You talk to them on a regular. You have to use the energy of all of these people, our sheroes and heroes, because they want to continue to impact our lives, right? They don't want to just have us, just show them off. Oh, we thank you, we love you for the life you live. They still want to be able to be integral in our success.
I love that, and it's so true. And it sounds like you got a real solid connection with your ancestors. Is that something that has like you grew up with, or is that something that you came into later on?
Yeah, I grew up with it. It was always just paying attention to spirit, right? At a very young age, my mother would say, you don't be afraid of spirit, because they'll come. There's messages for you, but if you act afraid, they won't ever show up again. And so it was just that understanding, having someone, walking me through the process of how to deal with spirit, how to deal with individuals when they cross over, to still have that communication, because there's still a lot of lessons to be learned from that energy. And so, yeah, I know a lot of people don't get that. A lot of times we're told when they, especially, growing up in the Christian household, right? We're often told if they're dead, they're done. And if you hear anything from them, that's not a good sign.
Right.
That's evil. That's, you need to put that to rest. But it was always this, we need to still have this connection with these individuals, because they still can, assist us in what we need to do.
I love that. And I love that for you. Because like you said, that was not my story. I've talked about that a
Mhm.
lot. I came from a religious background, and no, like you said, that was demonic. There was
Right.
nobody to talk to about that. But as a little girl, I always had this connection with them. And I
Yeah.
just didn't know who they were until later
Hmm.
on. But I know
Hmm.
that they was always there.
Yeah.
And they was helping, like you said, through the whole
Hmm.
life. Like, that's
Yeah.
how I look
Yeah.
at it. And
Yeah.
I've got this immense love for my ancestors today.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so I love that for you, that you were able to grow up that way. You sound very strong. I feel and hear the warrior in your your bloodline. So I'm glad that your grandfather was like, oh yeah, we could do the children's book later.
Yeah. He was like, no,
It's like
not right
we
now.
got
He was dead.
liberation right
Yeah. Right. 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 And it was so funny because you know how you send off all of this information, you're trying to get an agent for this, and you're trying to just get somebody to look at this, and immediately when I started working on the liberation work, it's like, oh yeah, we want that, and I'm like, oh, he was right.
now.
So it just wasn't the time for that. But and even and now coming into it, and people wanting to talk about root warriors and wanting to talk about the first book, I really see the need of it, right? I
Yeah.
really see how much people have been blessed by the work. So yeah.
Yep, that was going to be my next question. And I'm actually going to get the other book as well, because I saw that and I saw how the other one I probably want to have first, and
Hmm.
then dive into this one. But this is
Hmm.
definitely a very, very detailed. Just from what I looked inside of there at, I'm like, okay, yeah, this has got some real solid information in there. So, what has been some of the responses from your work from other people?
A lot of it is just the fact that they're happy that they have the information together, right? They have psalms, they have
Yes.
stories. Because my idea is, I never wanted to have something where it was just formulas, recipes. You see lots of that. I wanted to have a lot of our history,
Hmm.
as well as what people are dealing with today, because a lot of it parallels, right? And I wanted people to be able to see that, a lot of things that we deal with as adults, as women, a lot of things that men deal with, a lot of things that our children deal with. I wanted all of that to be recognized, and so people are saying that they feel seen. That's what I get a lot of. I was talking to a gentleman the other day when I was at work, and he was crying and he couldn't get it out, but he was saying how happy he was to, because he's dealing with a lot of racism at his job, right? He's a gay
Hmm.
male, but he's also somebody who feels like, I know my job, but I'm constantly getting this pushback, and to have something that I feel like right now I'm able to use, that jump in and use. And so I really wanted that for people. I didn't want them to have to go out and buy a whole bunch of tools. I wanted them to
Right.
be able to use what they had in their home. I always think about, what do you have in your cabinets in the
Yep.
kitchen right now? You got water, you got some soil, let's work with that. Things like that that are easy, for us to access, and instead of, $50, gemstones and all this other kind of stuff that we don't have time for, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. And that's how my ancestors are too. They're very, like you said, use what you got, because that's
Yeah.
what they was
Yeah.
doing. They didn't
Yeah.
have no
They didn't have
malls
time
and
to go
that.
check the toilets. They didn't say, hold up,
Right.
master, let me go to the store.
Use what you got,
Yeah.
and I love that about them. Like anytime I've had to do any kind of ancestral work, and if they did request something, it was always like inexpensive.
Yes.
Like you
Yes.
said, it was more about the intention behind
Right.
it. It was more about the
Right.
connection and the
Right.
ritual doing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And the
love
thing
that.
I think that that's what people, a lot of times they watch TikTok and they see the
Right.
videos of the rooms and the shrines, and they think, they get kind of scared. Like, I can't do that. It won't work for me because I don't have all those things, and it's not about that. And so I really wanted people to see that with both books, that that's not what it's about. Your intention and what you have at your disposal. If it's just a sheet of paper and a pencil, work that. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? You have to work what you have. Yeah.
I love that. And I love that bridge that you're creating for us to so that they can see what real root work is about.
Hmm.
It's not
Hmm.
all that trendy, flashy stuff
No.
that we see. It's
Hmm.
behind closed doors.
That's right.
It's,
That's right.
it's
And
you
it's
and your
messy. You're
ancestors.
gonna be dirty. You're gonna do. You know what I'm saying? It's not gonna be clean and cut and all this pretty
Right.
stuff. And yeah, no, it's
Yeah, and you're not
not.
going to do it perfectly when you learn it.
No,
But
no, you will
that's
not.
the practice of it. There's been
Yes.
times I'm like, "Oh, I forgot to do that,"
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, but my
Yeah.
ancestors
Yeah.
like, "Don't worry, we got you protected."
Right. 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 And maybe that wasn't called for. Just that's why you forgot.
Right.
You didn't need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So I love that, and
Mhm.
I love to hear that we're doing that. And because, like I said, I remember not having that or not, maybe it was out there, I don't know. But like I said, being somebody coming from a religious background, I was very
Mhm.
lost as to how to do things. And then there were certain things, like you said, TV made it seem like something
Right.
else, and you don't trust
Right.
nobody. So
Yeah.
yeah, to
Yeah.
know that you're
Yeah.
doing that work, I'm really
Yeah,
excited
yeah. And to
about
see
that.
ourselves too, that was another thing
Yes.
for me. We go to the stores, we go to the bookstores, and we find these books, and a lot of times we have to piece ourselves in parts of things that we see, or we're not quite sure that the author is a person of color, right?
Yep.
Because with AI and all these other things, we can paste somebody there who look like that for the next 20 years, and you're like, you find out that this person wasn't even real, right?
Yep.
But so all of these different things. And so I wanted people, especially like now, to see me and to see that I've been doing this, and this is what I do. And so yeah, yeah. So
I'm
and
glad you said that.
that's been a major response as well. People are like, oh my God, I can see you. I know, that you're a real person. And I'm not offended by that, because I do understand, because I understand buying the books and thinking
Mhm.
this person is real, and you find out that this person does not exist. So yeah.
Right. Or as somebody
Yeah.
that don't look like you. I mean, that's
Exactly. Oh
trust me,
yeah.
I know now when I'm looking at books to go to the author page.
Yeah.
You
Oh
know,
yeah.
you
Oh
got
yeah.
to and you got to see their body of work. And there's been some books that I'm like, "Oh man, like there's no
Yeah.
way you could be telling this from my perspective." And if you do try to get it,
Hmm.
there's going to be some sort of colonization, some kind of
Yeah.
colonized,
Yeah.
Eurocentric,
Yeah.
watered down,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
like where they're just going to soften the blow a little bit. But yeah,
Hmm.
so I'm glad
Hmm.
that you're out there doing that. I want to talk about the saints in Hoodoo and Black folk traditions. Saints show up differently than they do
Yeah.
in the Catholic. So, like, can you talk about how the saints function in Hoodoo and root work?
Okay. Yeah. So for me, in hoodoo, the saints, like when I talk about sheroes and heroes as saints, right? They function as they did in the world. Like we talk about Mother Catherine Seals, who I talk about from New Orleans, right?
Hmm.
And this woman who needed some help in her life. She had gone through some bad marriages. She was had a lot of abuse, and went to see this man who was a faith healer. And he said he didn't do anything for Black people. That wasn't his thing. And so when she went home and she prayed about it, and in this hope and this anticipation that if God delivered her, that she would open herself up for everyone, and she did that, right? And so all of these people came to see her. Zora Neale Hurston wrote about her. And so and white people came, everybody came, right? And
Hmm.
they sat in the back, because she told them, you're going to get some of what we've been getting.
I
You
love
can
it.
show up, but you sit in the back. We're up in the front. And you had Native people, Native American people. You had all of these different groupings of people. And she was a healer, and she had lots of jazz music playing. I mean, when she died, she had one of the biggest jazz funerals the city had ever seen,
Oh
over
wow.
1,000 people. But she was somebody who catered to the community. And so there was a lot of hatred because of the Black and white element coming in there, right? But she was firm about taking care of women and children. The innocent blood is what she called them. And so that was her major focus. How do we heal women and children? Because she remembered the time when she was seeking healing and that didn't happen. And so just from things like, using Epsom salt and, witch hazel and these just things, just little
Right.
things that you might have. I mean, she would use that in her curative methods. And so canonizing her, we can call on her to protect us, women who may find themselves, in abusive relationships, right?
Right.
Women who may need to have protection for their children. We send our children off to college, off to school, anywhere, right? Look for that protection. And so that's how she would focus. And in the book, I talk about creating a shrine for her, right? Or altar space. And just, you can download a picture, an image of her,
Mhm.
right? Put it in a cheap frame. It doesn't have to be expensive. And then all the other elements you add to it. And you write, I like journaling, right? So I always encourage clients, write a letter to her, ask her, talk to her about what it is in terms of healing that you would need, right, in your life for yourself and for your family. And that opens that whole portal of,
Mhm.
her just being able to bless you in that way. So for me, and the way that I've worked with clients, that's how they function. Just like you would think about any other saint, right? We're canonizing them. We're putting this place for them, and we're letting them know that they're still needed and they're still loved, right?
I love that, and I love the whole story behind that because that is relatable,
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
said, to everyday
yeah.
people,
Uh-huh.
and whereas some of these other saints, or even some of the different deities or from different traditions, like maybe voodoo or something like that, if you
Hmm,
don't know
hmm.
that, if that's not in your bloodline, you
Right,
may
right.
feel like I don't want to touch that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
this is
yeah,
something that's accessible, and I
yeah.
like that. I really really enjoy that. Yeah,
Hmm,
thank you
hmm.
for that. So
Yeah,
y'all get the book, I'm telling y'all, because it's
yeah, yeah,
it's a
yeah.
whole bunch of
And
stuff in there.
I divined on, I wrote down a list of people that I thought about, right?
Hmm.
And so there was divination going into who wanted to go into this book. Because I do workshops. And so the workshops, you might see some overlapping saints. A lot of times it's different people. So different people wanted to speak for this book, right? So that
Okay.
energy that came to this book was energy that was divined upon, that was needed for this time. And so, yeah, so it's not just, happenstance, just pulling names. It was
Right.
really, I sat down for months, and going over what was needed. What would you have required to put out there for a mass, for a public, right?
Hmm.
Consumption. And so, but when I teach the classes on, creating your own spaces for individuals that you might, have an affinity for, we talk about how to come about divining, how to go about, setting up the altar space, what you would use that person for, things like that. So we get really deep into it. But the book, if you get the book and you read the book, you start to feel comfortable with, how to fashion it and
Right.
everything. Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. That's really important too, because I think that some people who may be just starting out, they don't
Mhm.
realize that your ancestor altar is separate than when you're
Yes.
doing work.
Yeah.
And so once you start to kind of graduate over into this side and feel comfortable with the spirit realm and working with these different trusted saints, it's a different process and protocol. So that's very important work
Yes.
that
Yes.
you're
Yes.
doing.
Hmm.
Yes, I love that. And I love the fact, like you said, we didn't just pick some people.
No, no. That's people ask, people do
Yeah.
ask. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
good to know. But that doesn't surprise me with you,
Hmm.
because it seems like everything you do is intentional and ancestor led. So
Hmm.
so awesome. So you talked about the Psalms, which is
Hmm.
a big part of Hoodoo. And I think that's something that's tangible for people who are deconstructing Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you said something about reverse engineering Psalms. Tell
Hmm.
us what that
Hmm.
means.
Hmm. Okay. So my grandfather, he wasn't really a super religious guy, right? But he believed that, if when we think about how we came into our own knowledge of Christianity, being imposed upon us, and when the white people would sit in the back of the churches just to make sure you didn't say certain things, you didn't read certain parts. He said, we could take those words, right, that they gave us to keep us subjugated, to keep us,
Mhm.
in this mental enslavement, and we could turn it around and create a spell out of it. So when we say it, when we use it as part of our hoodoo work, as part of our work, like dealing with Mother Catherine, and we're reading and we're reciting, now it is not holding us back. it's freeing us, it's allowing us to use it. And
Yes.
it's like if you take a gun and you shoot it, right, you're now the gun is in my hand, right? And
Hmm.
so it's going out there into the world, and now it's a weapon, right, to be used against those who oppressed us, because it's not that's not the way they intended it to be used, right?
Right.
They intended it to keep us subjugated and keep us with this, mental enslavement. And now we're telling the words that you're going to serve a different purpose. And so that's when we use it in our work. And so that is that reverse engineering.
Interesting. I
Mm-hmm.
never thought about it that way as
Mm-hmm.
far as like
Mm-hmm.
you're telling the words now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know I
Yeah.
know that I would pick certain scriptures that
Yeah.
kind of told the story already, but I never even thought about actually telling the words. I love that. And of course
Uh-huh.
that's why they didn't want us to be able to read or be able to
Exactly.
comprehend. It's
Exactly.
like if you could
Exactly.
memorize something, but if you don't have no
Right.
comprehension, you don't even know what you're saying,
You don't even know what you're saying. That's right. And
Yeah.
that's why they took certain parts out, and that's why they decided that, there was going to be a nigger Bible, for
Hmm.
you. And then they would have, and that's why they had to constantly be there, right? To make sure that there was never anything else that would have you even think about freedom.
Right.
As long as you're constantly rehashing this idea that I need to be enslaved, that I should be enslaved, that these people are freeing me, that they're giving me humanity, and you don't know that you already have humanity, then there's no dissension. You're just following along, and then you're going to teach your children to follow along, and
Right.
so on forth. But when we say reverse engineering, now we're saying no, we see what this is, and we're going to use it in a different way.
I love that. I don't think I've ever heard that, but that's
Mhm.
I mean, perfect. That's why I always say our ancestors was brilliant.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
were brilliant. They were brilliant, especially for the conditions they had during that
Right,
time.
right,
And
right.
then also, if you even go back further than that, then we're going to put this in the DNA so you can
Hmm.
activate that and it can't be stolen. And
That's right. That's right. That's
I was
right.
like, that's brilliant. I'm like, you know what? That's brilliant.
Hmm.
And that kind of brings me to my next question about closed practices, because um, there's a lot, like you said, we see on social media,
Yeah,
particularly TikTok, that I'm looking like, what are you doing?
yeah,
Particularly when it comes
yeah.
to hoodoo.
Hmm.
Some of the other practices, not so much. They've maintained that
Hmm.
um, closed container, but with
Hmm.
hoodoo, how do you feel about closed practices and hoodoo? Like, where do you think hoodoo falls in, whether or not it's
Yeah,
closed or
yeah.
open?
Yeah. Well, when I was taught, when I learned about and became really ingrained in it, um, the lessons were that it came from us being, our enslavement, right? And so our interaction with the native people who were already here, those indigenous people, the herbs that were here, because naturally we were not in our homeland. So we had to use what was here. And so if it's born out of that necessity, nobody's there to take care of an enslaved woman if she's pregnant. There's no doctor for you. There's no doctor for your mental trauma. And
Right.
so Hoodoo had to handle all of those things. So that's why we say it's closed. For those people who, when white people come and they say, well, why can't I? And I said, because you always want to colonize everything. That's the reason why you're asking about the why. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? You just want to own something. And so you can go and do Wicca, you can go and do
Right.
whatever your folk magic you want to do, but this has its own purpose, and it's steeped in this need and this desire to be protected, to fight. And so you don't have those same needs, you know what I'm saying, that we have in this way. And so that's why we say it's closed. Now, oftentimes they want to jump in, because whereas when we look at practices like Vodun and we looked at Ifa, there's initiations that we
Right.
know. And there's some people that say, well, in hoodoo, you are kind of initiated because you're being taught by someone, right? But it's not as formal, as we think about the others, right? And so it's harder for them to say, I'm a voodoo practitioner on my own. I did this. But whereas they feel like they can do that with hoodoo, because they want to just look at it as just being folksy, and I can just do anything and say that, my grandmother knew this black woman who taught her, or just I can do it because I can, you know. But we say it's closed off because of how it was born out of this need for freedom and
Right.
protection. And if you don't know those things, then you can't be a part of this, right?
Right.
So
Okay, so I agree that it should be closed.
Hmm.
That's me personally. That's what I get from my ancestors for all the reasons that you just said, and the fact that everything that they take gets culturally appropriated. The original creators get completely
Right.
pulled out of it. The purpose, the everything about it.
Mhm.
Now, me personally, I haven't seen any white people running around claiming hoodoo, but I guess you're in New Orleans, so
Well,
so
and
you've seen
when
it.
I go to conferences, I see it. I see that they're writing about it. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
they're there. They are there.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
I
I
hadn't
just go,
seen it.
what? Yeah. And there are some people who want to feel like, well, let's just open it up to them. No, but it's not. It's not meant to be. Yeah.
Right. And I agree. And thank you for that. That's what I wanted to hear. And I say that
Hmm.
all the time. Hoodoo is a closed practice. If you
Hmm.
see me saying anything on social media, it's generic and could
Right.
be applied across several different practices,
Hmm.
but it's not the real hoodoo. Those are closed containers,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
even me, the work that I do, working with specifically Black women, when I have my classes and stuff, I ask people to respect the container. So if I put it out publicly on Eventbrite or something like that, then I have people, they got to put their camera on. I need to know who you are because I've had people try to slip in.
Yeah.
They will
Oh,
try to
yeah.
slip in,
Yeah.
and they just want to see what we doing. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know it's and that's the truth. Yeah, they want to see what you're doing, what you're saying.
right,
I've had workshops, and it's like I don't understand, and the workshops are catered towards how to utilize the information to be more of an anti-racist, right?
right,
And so when you show up and you know that they're going to show up ready to be victimized, you know what I'm
right.
saying? Then you know exactly where you're going because there are not going to be any hugs and kisses and oh, it's going to be all right for you. No, you need to cry about it because we've been crying
Mhm.
about it forever. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
right.
So if you find the difficulty in understanding that other people have humanity, that's something that you're going to have to sit with on your own time. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
this is our healing process, finally.
Yes, yes, yes,
I'm
yes.
like, now we're
There
getting
is
to a
no
place.
room to be, patting your shoulder and all this. We don't have time for that. Yeah.
Yep. I love that. So you said that you actually have workshops and things like that. Tell us how you actually help people with the work that you do outside of the book and authorship.
Yeah. So I do a lot of past life readings. And so we talk a lot about the problems that they've had stem from way back when, and how that specific past life resonates with what problems they're having like today and right now. And then we tie that into how they can work with the saint, a particular saint, to help come to some healing, 'cause for them for this life, and hopefully that won't show up again in another lifetime. So that's the kind of work that I've been doing as of recently. And so in males and females, been working with, oftentimes when people hear about past life, they want to know, was I king or a queen, kind of thing like that, was I famous? And so
Right.
I often tell people when I do the readings, a lot of things show up, but what we're looking for is what resonates with whatever impasse you're at right now. And so that is the life that usually takes center stage, the one that shows that you've probably been going through this same thing, over and over again at some point, but this was the most highlighted. And so how can we use that information to, develop some change in your life and to get you on a different path? And so we do that. And then, like I say, we decide on, what saint they would need to work with, how they would develop that space. And, they have a lot of freedom to do that. What do they think they need? How does this person sit with them? And so that might be a couple of weeks. We might just on them just thinking about, what they would want to bring to the table. And then, I walk them through setting it up. And then they usually do that. And about a month when they feel comfortable, they continue to work with it. And then they, I check in on them and see how it's going.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot because, like you said, it's not going to be what you want to see. It's
No,
going
it's
to be
not.
what you need.
It's gonna be what you need.
Just like when people get, divining from the ancestors. And I tell people all the time, like it's not going to be, I give it to you straight like they gave it to me.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And it's not going to be, colorful, sugar coated, watered
Mhm.
down. It's going to be what you need. May not be what you want, but it's always what you
Right,
need.
right, right.
This is that. See, people still have to get that that fictitious Hollywood
Yes.
movie stuff out their head. We got to get that
Mhm.
out too. Coming over
Right.
here, it's like that's not what this
No,
is.
I tell them we can't all be kings and queens. We can't all be. It's
That's
okay
right.
though. It's okay.
Right. But speaking of movies, so
Mhm.
recently I heard you on another podcast and you were talking about your involvement with the movie Sinners, which I love that
Mhm.
movie, by the way. So
Mhm.
tell us about that, like how that came
Yeah.
about for you.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine, Yvonne Shiro, she called me. I was at work, I was at school, and she was asking me about, they were looking for somebody to help out with like marketing, figuring out how they wanted to market to the journalists, right? As the movie was about to premiere. And my mom was ill during that time, but we did have these conversations. And so at first it was more or less, how can we package kind of like trinkets, to give to the journalists. And it was like they wanted like juju bags or mojo
Hmm.
bags and things like that to get, yeah, to give to them. And that was the big idea. And we could give it to them and they could go off and we could have maybe a little paper with it that talks about, what's in it and things. And so I let them give their spiel, and and then I
Right.
said, this is a real serious practice. If you do that, then you take away from the movie, you take away from all of it. Then you have a large group, a population of people who are anticipating this movie that are going to lose it.
Right.
If they see this like that, they're going to lose it. And so it was probably about 3 or 4 conversations, and then they were like, "Okay, well, we'll scratch that." And so I was happy that they did that. At first, I was really nervous. I was thinking, because they're probably thinking, who does she think she is? We're gonna go with this anyway. We'll just talk to somebody else. But I kept stressing to them that hoodoo is serious. It is a
Yeah.
real practice. And I remember I sent an e-copy of the first book, and I wanted them to really get a feel, for how it resonates in the world. And I think that it really got across. I think that they really started to see that there could be other ways of dealing with, of showcasing. Because I even said something like, well, you could do, since you have a vampire, right? You could have something with deal with vampires, right? I don't think the vampire community will be upset, but just
Right.
don't do that with hoodoo. And so yeah, that went across well. And when I talked to them again, they were happy, with how everything went. But it was important to me, whether they wanted to continue talking to me or not, but to have that say. You know, you don't want to do that. You don't commodify it. It's a serious practice, and you have serious practitioners waiting for this movie to drop, and they want to be able to see themselves in a good light. Not something that's negative, in a positive light. So yeah,
I love that, and I love the fact that you maintain the integrity of
yeah,
our practice.
yeah,
That to me is like very important, and I feel like I'm glad they called you and not somebody
yeah.
else.
Yeah, because
And
some people would jump right to it. I'll make them,
yeah,
and yeah, yeah. So
yeah,
yeah,
sell out in a heartbeat.
hmm yeah,
So, so so thank you for keeping the practice closed. and
hmm
and I saw the movie, and that was, everybody got what they got out of it, different
yeah,
aspects and
yeah,
pieces.
yeah.
But of course I was drawn to the hoodoo, and I thought it was
hmm
very tastefully
I
done.
thought so too. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it was very tastefully done, and they had just enough in there, not too much. And for those if you know,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. If you know, you
like.
know. That's right. That's right.
And so
That's
I
right.
thank you for that. I feel like that was another one of those moments where you got to show up as a warrior, spirit, and
Yeah.
be like, whoa, whoa, wait a minute,
hmm
like, let's protect our
hmm
sacred
hmm
practice.
hmm
So awesome.
Yeah, and
That.
Yvonne Chiro was wonderful with that. She did that part as far as the movie, making
Hmm.
sure that they had it right. So yeah, that was wonderful. And you want to have people who really respect the culture,
Right.
doing it, as opposed to somebody, like you say, who's ready to sell out. So yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for that. So now I want to move into women as spiritual leaders, because
Mhm.
yes, let's talk about it. Like, what does that mean for you? Like, what do you mean when you say that?
Well, I know when I was first initiated to E5, that was a big deal, right? And so when we're in the house, the Elay that I was initiated, and the women did a lot. They were speaking up. The women were initiators, right? There were men there, and the Babas were there, but the women had a say. right? And so there was always this communion of women who were saying, yeah, you got everything that you need. We can do this. You're born from a woman. So why can't women have the power to be these voices, these spiritual leaders? But so often we don't see that. We see women relegated to singing in the choir or, bringing the priestess water or whatever, but they're not, out front. It's like it's almost, this whole idea that God doesn't call women,
Right.
because of whatever reason. And so I want women to feel like they can step out there and they can say and they can have their say and they can be a voice for their family. Even if your family is your church, so to speak, right? You can be that leader of that family, and be the spiritual head. And I don't want them to be afraid to do that. And so with the first book, that was really what I really wanted to push. It's this idea that, it doesn't matter what your job is, what your educational background is, if you have this connection to spirit and you're developing a deeper connection to spirit, then you can be a leader. You're a leader. You don't need to look to somebody else to tell you what to do, because only you know that situation and your voice and your association and how you feel about that connection. Only you can do that. They can't bring you to God, or to
Right.
goddess. You have to be willing to do that. And so I just want us to be able to say that we can step out there and be good and be firm with that. And we don't have to look to another gender to be able to lead us.
I love that. And that's so
Mhm.
true. And I I have my thought process as to how this all started, like where women got this reduced role. Like, what
Mhm.
do you think was the cause of this, particularly in traditional African spirituality? Like, how did we adopt this? Or has that been something that it always was like? Was it the culture always like that, or was it something that we adopted based on?
I think it was adopted based upon the colonization, right? This idea of these, when women had this role of being midwives and they were, they could be doctors and all these healers, and then all of a sudden we want to say that that's evil, right? And they shouldn't be doing those things. And if a woman's going to have a baby, she needs to go to a man, and he's the doctor, he's the one. And so I think it just started to bleed over into everything, right?
Hmm.
So now we don't want to listen to you as far as being, someone who has these visions, right? You're this spiritual person, that's you're demonic, that's evil. You can't do that. And so I think it just started to just bleed over into how we look at everything that we do. We start to judge women in whatever role they take. Can you run a company? Can you be the leader of this school? Can you do any of these things? Because you're a woman, and you're iffy in your thoughts. You have a cycle, so that means you're crazy, half of the month or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, I just think that it was this whole idea of men needing to find their own place, right? And then finding that, usurping the power that women hold.
Yep. And that's pretty much the same thing I was going to say in a different way, which is that they adopted that patriarchal
Hmm.
construct, which,
Hmm.
overtook, which really was never our thing. That
No,
that's what
no.
always confuses me. I'm like, how did y'all
Right,
adopt that part
right,
of colonization? Like,
right, right. Exactly,
I'm like, that's
exactly.
not our stuff. Like,
No,
that never had anything to do with indigenous practices and
no,
stuff
it
like that. So
never did.
yeah, and women, like you said, women were doing a lot and right on up there, and it never was a competitive type of thing. It was
No,
just the
no.
roles, that
It
we
was just a
carried.
role. It was just a role.
Right,
When you think about it, if they're out there hunting and you're there, you have to take care of everything else, right? So you're going
right,
to be more ingrained in the herbs, and you're going to be more ingrained in how to take care of the family and the
right,
nucleus that's here. So it's not oh, I'm better than you. It's just,
right.
where I am, I'm going to have to learn this terrain, just like you have to learn how to survive out there on the hunt,
That's right.
So yeah.
I love that. Yep. So yeah. So I want to talk about something a little. It's all kind of all encompassing. Power, responsibility, and discernment. Okay. So as people start to step into working with these different hoodoo saints and working with
Mhm.
separate altars, what do you want them to know about responsibility with that type of spiritual knowledge?
Yeah. Well, the main thing is, make sure that they're definitely empowered, but make sure that you're always doing something for your community, and that
Mm,
keeps you grounded. During the pandemic, when people were calling me because they couldn't get out to church and everything like that, and they wanted readings, they wanted to know. And I would say, when you do go to the grocery store, right? In lieu of paying me, you don't have to pay me, but get some extra canned goods, leave them on your neighbor's porch, or get some school supplies and put them in a bag for a kid who may need some things while they're home, right? Things like that. Just being able to reach out to the community. And for a lot of people, these were things that they weren't hearing. They were like, oh, what?
Right.
You don't want to get paid because my preacher want money, and how can we connect with our community? So the more that they start to use the saints and work with the saints, and don't forget that it's not just about your own empowerment, how I can be better or the best at what I'm doing, but how I can bring my whole community along. And so if they start to just constantly remember that in their thoughts, when I'm doing something for me, I need to also be doing something for the community. And so that's what I would tell people to do. It's easy
Wow.
to work and to think it's just me and I want to have, but that's that colonizer
Yeah.
mentality again, you know. So we have to always think about how we're going to help each other, right? How am I going to pull you along? If I know how to do this and it's working for me, then I want to share with you, and I'm going to encourage you to share with the next person.
I love that. You know what? I don't think I've ever had anybody say that. We also all we forget about the whole service and giving back
Yeah,
aspect. Like you said,
yeah.
it's another one of those constructs
Hmm.
of colonization that when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, like,
Yeah, yeah.
what the heck am I
I have,
doing?
I have gotten, tablets and pencils and placed it on the altar, for Mother Catherine Seals and blessed it and then dropped it off at a school. And nobody has to know.
Right.
I'm not going there to say, hey, it's me. I did this. Can you give this to a kid that needs, right? But it's already been blessed by that altar space. And I'm going and I'm moving on to the next thing. But that
I love
helps me
that.
as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that needs to be said more often. So I'm grateful that you said that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you got me thinking now on that one. I was like, am I doing enough? Because it is easy to kind of get like it's just me. I'm an empty nester now. So, I ain't got
Yeah.
nobody
Yeah.
to think about but me. So then I could be now I'm like, oh yeah, okay, now let's get the career going. Let's get the business
Hmm.
going. But yeah, but for
Hmm.
what? Really,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's a big part of what our ancestors are doing. It's not just elevating myself, my family, but it's like, okay, now you've done all this healing, you got to a certain point. Now what are you gonna do to help the community, like you said?
Right, right.
Yeah, so beautiful, beautiful. All right. Well, this has been an empowering conversation. I want to go back to the book because that's where this started. And I
Hmm.
just want to ask you, what is it that you want your audience to know about this book, and like, why should they get this?
Well, I want them to know that it is truly a book about liberation, how we can heal. I offer a lot of detailed information about different historical people, but also there's a lot of client, detailed information. And so I always ask the clients, but there was always a lot of, situations that I think that parallel our own lives, and so how they'll see themselves show up in a lot of the stories, as well as there's a reading list, and I encourage people to take one book and just get your little group of people together and start talking about it, reading that book and figuring out how that fits into your healing, how that would fit into community healing, because that's how I do it. I think about how it could help me personally, then how it could be something that could encourage the community. So I definitely have that in there too. So because I'm never just thinking about me as a writer. I want to think about our community and all these other people that we might not really, hear about anymore, but their books are still in circulation and it's
Mhm.
easy to get. And that'll also be a challenge for us to be better, to grow more, not just in our knowledge, but in how we deal with each other.
I love that. That's beautiful. So yeah, so you guys can get the book at your website. Is that the
And,
best place to get it?
they go to any Black bookstore, any BIPOC bookstore. That's where to go.
I
I'm
love
telling
it.
people, yes, yes.
So yeah, I'm definitely going to put the information down in the description as well. And then just tell us one more time, like how we can find you, like all the services, if you got any classes coming up.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely you go to my webpage, Mawiyah Kai EL-Jamah Bomani.com. You can find me on Instagram, Mawiyah Bomani. Yeah, I'll be in Atlanta on the 3rd of January. And so it'll be a book talk. It'll also be, we'll do a little bit of ritual, a little bit of ritual. And so that'll be fun, but you have to sign up early for that so you can make sure that they have all the tools. Because if you sign up, they'll have the tools for you that you'll need to use for the rituals. And then I'll be in Baltimore in February. I want to say the 19th through the 23rd for the Between the Worlds conference. So yeah, that's what's coming up.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to join me. I'm glad I got the book. I got some homework to do. I'm going to be studying into this. I got time off next week. I'm excited. Oh, I'm excited. So,
Thank you
yeah,
so
but
much for this space, and thank you for having me. I watch
absolutely.
all of your all everything, all of your YouTube, and I love it. I just love your energy, you know.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm definitely following you around too. So, because I'm learning from you. So, thank you
Mhm,
so much. All
mhm.
right, y'all. Y'all know what to do. Look down in the description. I'm going to have all the contact information for Mawiyah. And yeah, that is it. Until the next episode.